infinite complaisance, people went to and fro of the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
On this episode of Into the Fray, I welcome actually back on with me Miss Leah Dressel. She has been on before with her husband Jake for episode 286, Littlefoot of Huber Heights, and that is Huber Heights, Ohio. And they both, I'm not going to go through the story again, but yeah, they saw a small-ish looking Bigfoot type creature around their home. But Leah, I found out recently that, and also, before we get into this, thank you and Jake for coming out to Monster Fest just this past weekend. That was so fun. You guys were there for the entire weekend. You actually both showed up on Friday for the screening, and then Saturday all day was the Monster Fest event. And it was quite eventful and it worked out well, the venue, because a lot of people came into town and they stayed there at not only at the hotel, but then we had the restaurant there downstairs, which conveniently, of course, had a bar. It's not a dry county, and we were not dry that weekend, that is for sure. And we found out that if you're going to talk about John Paul Capice, because he drove out from Rhode Island, that apparently you have to describe him as a male aged 40 to 60, right? Which was shocking to us. Ashley, bless your heart. He's never going to live that down, by the way. That clip has floated around within the group now, and we're all dying laughing about that. So, JP, sorry about that, bro, but you are now officially the old man. That is your title.
Oh, here's the funny thing. I'm exactly one day older.
That made my year.
Quite a range.
Man.
Quite a range.
Yeah,
right.
But thank you guys for coming out. That was just so fun. And just a quick shout out to a few of the other folks that showed up as well. Patreon members that made a huge effort to come out. One of them all the way from Alaska. David and his daughter came out. My young friend, I'll just call him G. He was in the ITF logo t-shirt. And his mom, she has been a guest on the show previously, not going to mention who that is, but also Tim, Matthew, Shanna, and Jim from the Ancient and Powerful episodes, and Denise. It was so good to have everybody out there, and we snagged a few photos and had some drinks and some laughs, and yeah, just thank you guys for doing that.
It was a blast. I mean, I can't wait for the next one, so we had a great time.
Yeah, part 2. Got to do it. Maybe this time it should be like a 2-day event, which will turn into like a 4-day event. It would just have been nice to just have a little extra time on the outskirts of everything that was going on. It was just so busy. And I think that, and I'm so glad that it was, I mean, packed, absolutely packed. We didn't know what to expect, but considering that it was so packed, I'm hoping that, yeah, maybe round 2 is afoot. All right. So back to what I was saying. Sorry for the off the rails right at the beginning there, but I had to say that because I appreciated everybody coming out, including you and Jake. Good to finally meet you guys. So yeah, you guys were on for 286, and you know that was strange enough, right? That was something very odd. Jake saw it first, and you saw it, but this is not your first rodeo with strange things. And I think that in setting up for this, and I'm not going to go through the list before we actually talk about the list, but you set it up really, really nicely, and it'll set the tone. And I wanted to start with your parents, and as much info as you think is necessary or that you want to share, you can share. But you set it up nicely by saying, my family is from the mountains of Tennessee. And you're like, even my dad was just born in a cabin, in the mountains. And I can just picture that. And I think that sets things up nicely. So I'm assuming from what you told me that it's probably a little important to give some background on your parents, right?
So it's actually my entire family on both sides. My dad was born in a cabin on a mountain in Tennessee in a very small town called Monterey. The closest bigger city is Cookeville, Tennessee. Next to Monterey is another small town called Livingston. When I say small town, I mean like 2 stoplights, maybe. Like they got a Dairy Queen and they were like, yeah, like this is Dairy Queen is the place to be. But it is a very small town in Tennessee where both sides of the family are from. My parents, coincidentally, though, didn't meet in Tennessee, they met in Ohio. All the people in my family, they moved here to Dayton for the GM jobs. There's other stories that I've heard of people moving in this area for AK Steel jobs. So just having those types of jobs to move to is how my family migrated from Tennessee to Ohio. But they're all from these mountains in Tennessee. Both sides very Christian. My dad's side probably more so than my mom's side. My grandparents, before they passed, their neighbors were the Mennonites. So I have all these memories of visiting my grandmother, and then we'd go to the Mennonite store and see all the furniture and quilts that they made, and they had a deli, and we'd get a sandwich. But yeah, the point to all that is it's very rural and very country, very mountainy. The cabin that my dad grew up in still exists, still on the mountain, and they go every July to have a family reunion. But most of what I've experienced throughout my life, I believe, comes from my mom's side of the family. I don't think that I'm psychic per se, but I do think that I'm sensitive, and I always have been. My brother has always been pretty sensitive as well. He's a very prolific dreamer as well as I am, but he just does it differently than I do. Yesterday we were actually talking about some of the different things that we've had happen, and we didn't realize like how many connections, like we've had the same thing happen, we just didn't talk about it before. So my mom's dad, my grandfather, this is where this starts. I always grew up hearing stories that he would tell. So my grandfather, he was a tank driver in World War II. He was from Tennessee. He grew up in this really rural area, like just in the mountains as well. He has, and I mentioned World War II because he's seen some stuff, right? But he would talk about, he had a story that he told, and it's actually in a book called Cracker Barrel Tales by this guy named J.D. Eldridge. And it's mentioned as a blip in the book where it talks about some fellow was walking by a cemetery. Well, that some fellow would be my grandfather. And it was late at night, and he heard a noise, and he saw, and in the book it calls it a snow white lamb that had it was very bright, and but it was missing its head, and it followed him home. But my grandfather never described it as a lamb. He just said it was a white thing. And this is funny because at Monster Fest, Jay, who was one of the other podcasters that was there hanging with us, I don't know if I can mention his podcast.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So Jay has a podcast with his friend Justin, Cryptids of the Corn, and they're actually located in Ohio as well. And they talk about on this white thing phenomenon, how like people will see this white thing and they believe it's an animal, but they don't know what type of animal it is. And it could be a very small, like a lamb type animal, or something as big as a polar bear type animal. And people have seen it, but they can't make out what it is. And it's at night and it kind of follows you type deal. Well, coincidentally, my grandfather had this story about a white thing following him when he was walking home by the cemetery. And that is just, it's just mentioned in this little book here. Another story that he always told was when my grandmother was in the hospital. She was giving birth to my aunt. There were 5 kids. My mom has 4 other siblings, 1 sister, 3 brothers. So there's 2 girls, 3 boys. And it went boy, girl, boy, girl, boy. So when my aunt was being born, and she's the second oldest, back in those days, the men didn't go to the hospital and watch like they do now. So he just went back home. My grandfather did. You know, you drop the lady off, she has a baby, you come back in the morning, oh, I'm a dad.
Man.
But I guess that night when he was sleeping, he woke up. And when he woke up, he says, he saw a see-through lady floating over him while he was laying in bed. And it scared him to death, to where he left the house and didn't come, like he just, nope, out. And again, he had seen some stuff in World War II. And then this is what scared him. So I've always grown up with these kinds of stories. Another one was on that same road by the cemetery in Tennessee. They would always see a wagon going down the road by itself without horses. And they would hear it often, and they would always say, "Oh, it's just that wagon again," like a residual, I guess, type deal. But they always talked about it. So this is always stuff that I knew growing up as a kid.
That book, Cracker Barrel Tales, is it all paranormal stories in there?
No. So it's weird, a weird book. So I've read it, but it has all kinds of different stories about that area of Tennessee. Like Overton County, where it talks about like how the schoolhouses used to be, and how people, dug a whale, and then different kind of stuff, like just from that time period, from when my grandfather was a boy. And then I think what it is taking stories from like the local paper and then just kind of like put it all in one book. And then it'll have like poems in it too. I think that those things were submitted to this paper, and then just like different tales about different people around the town, like different stories that they would just tell. But at the end of it, there is like a section on the ghost stories that people told around that area.
Yeah, I just looked
So
it up, and it looks like it's quite the collectible. There's a copy
yeah,
on Etsy for $53, so that's so cool. I mean, you can tell it's like an old timey deal, even just by the
yeah,
cover. It's got that air about it. I bet that'd be a cool thing to have in the collection.
yeah. So I have it. I'm actually holding it right now because, and inside, my mom bought it off of Amazon. It inside, it's signed by the author. So, and there was another man that wrote a book about the wagons, the white thing that my grandfather saw, and it was kind of like a self-published thing because it looked like it's like the school binding, like it's like a bunch of computer paper bound together, by itself, and then like a clear plastic cover on the front. But when my mom was doing research on all this, she looked up the guy that wrote the book and called him, because she's a retired police officer. So this is just what she does. So she found the guy on the internet, calls him, The guy's like 94 years old. He answered the phone, and then he starts talking to her about how, oh yeah, I knew your dad. I went to when he enlisted in the army, I went with him, and so he was just telling her all these stories, and then he sent her a copy of that book as well.
Well, that's
So it's
cool.
kind of neat. Yeah.
Yeah, especially that he remembered. I mean, being that of that age and being like, "Oh yeah, I knew your dad." Like we were way back in the day. That's so cool.
Yeah. So just that's, I mean, I guess that's a little brief history there. My mom has always she's been a little bit sensitive herself as well, but she's also a very Christian person because of how she grew up. And there was somebody on, is it Pam? If I get that name wrong, I apologize. Jake always calls her the unicorn because he likes listening to her whenever she's been on. She talks about how her family was really religious as well, but they called it working with their ancestors as a way to kind of marry the two together. And I think that's what my mom has done. But she always she had some things happen to her as well when she grew up. And one of her stories was when she was about 16 years old, her and her friends were together, and they were having a seance. And she said when things happen, they always happen when this one female was there. And I'm talking, like, she said one time the screen of the window just like got punched out in the middle of them doing what they were doing. But one time she said this young lady kind of like went into a trance, I guess, as they were seancing, and some of the guys were messing around, and then she just shot up and just walked immediately out the house. So everybody's like, "Oh my God, what's going on? What's going on?" So they start following her, and they go to the car that my mom and her boyfriend at the time had drove there in, and she's trying to get in the car. They're like, "It's locked. Let her in. Let her in." And he's like, "It's not locked. It's not locked." Well, she gets the door open, and I guess she sits down in the passenger seat where my mom was sitting, and then digs into the seat, like in between the cushions, and she pulls out a picture, and the picture is her, like her senior picture. They're like black and white at the time, and on the back of the picture was the name Mark written on it, and it was written like a little boy wrote it. And she had found out, I want to say like a few months beforehand, that she found out she had a brother that had passed away when he was really young. But I don't like she didn't remember because she was too little, or they had her after he passed away, and his name was Mark.
Mm.
And the thing about her finding it in the car was my mom said that day they had just completely cleaned out that car, like lifting up the chairs and getting all in between everything. They just totally cleaned it out. So they had no idea how this picture of her got in there, let alone with this boy's name on it that
Yeah.
happened to be the same name as her brother.
Yikes.
So that was a story my mom always told, and she always said that that was like one of the like whoa things. And because they had the screen punched out of the window that day, the next time that they did this, they nailed the screen into the window, into the sill. And when they went back in the house, it was punched out again, nails and all.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So hesitated to even like come on the show, but Jake really encouraged me to do so because I sometimes feel like when I tell these stories, anybody can be like, "Oh, that's just yanking your chain," or "It's just a hearsay story," or whatever, whatever. But I think you've had like a lot of people on recently that have told all these like random
Like the one-offs.
stories that have,
Yep.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then so I guess that coupled with Jake's encouragement sort of made me come on here and talk to you. Because I realized, like, anything that I say, anybody could be like, well, and I get it, because I was a skeptic for a long, long time too. But then all these weird things happen. So for me, I guess this started for me when I was young and dumb. I have a cousin. Her name is Sarah. She's actually that aunt that my grandma was giving birth to, and my grandfather saw her. That's her mother. Well, she had passed away. Her mother passed away. My aunt passed away when I was 13. So Sarah would have been 11. So it was just a terrible time to lose your mother. But at that time, because that was my mom's sister, my cousins, her niece and nephew, became like second children to her. And really, she's my cousin, but she's more like my sister. Because after my aunt got sick, we were with them all the time. And then after she passed, we were with them all the time still. Like it just always together. Either my brother and I were going to their house and staying with my uncle, or they were coming to our house and staying with us. But Sarah is actually, I I would say that she is pretty gifted, but I've come to find, like, if you're pretty gifted, that sometimes it's hard to shake off the bad too. She lost her mom, so she was always trying to, we were, again, dumb, and so we decided one day we would do this Ouija board to try to talk to her mom, which is what she wanted desperately. So a friend of mine had her mom had sold their house, and she still had the house key, and the house was empty before the next people that bought the house were coming in to move. So we end up going to this empty house with my two girlfriends, and Sarah was with me. I don't think we had the Ouija board, but somebody had a Ouija board. So here we are using this Ouija board in this empty house. And I feel kind of bad now. Like, I don't know what I unleashed in this house that new tenants just come on in.
Welcome home, guys.
Right. We've opened a portal to hell just right here in your kitchen.
You didn't know you had roommates, did you? Here you go.
So Sarah and I decide, okay, well, let's do this, So here we are, and we start using the Ouija board, and we start asking questions. And it said that it was Nancy, which is her mom's name. And then we decided we're going to vet it. We're going to, like, ask specific questions that only my aunt would know. And so we did. And everything came out, copacetic, like it was like really her. And then Sarah said, well, do you have a message for me? And it said, yeah. And we were like, okay, so what's the message? Then it started to go FUC. And then we went, oh, we just let go. We were like, crap. It gives me chills to think about how it was, because it was just, this was not my aunt. This is not my aunt. She wouldn't say that to her daughter. And Sarah knew that that's not, and we knew that we were messing with something not great at that point in time.
Yeah.
Because it started to, give us a nasty message. Like, even at the F and U, we were like, what is she gonna say? And then we were like, oh, we tried to have a seance too, her and I. But when we did that, I looked up at her, and her face got real distorted to me. And I guess the same thing happened to her when she looked at my face.
Mm.
And then we stopped everything then and there. We kind of realized that we were not going to get the answers that we wanted on our own, and being, dumb kids thinking that we were going to get these answers, but we did not.
I mean, it's super creepy, though, because prior to the FUC coming up, and we know what comes after that,
Right.
It knew
Right.
all of the questions that you
It knew
guys were trying to
everything, yeah.
get out of it. Yeah.
So, yeah, it was not a good is not a good thing, that we were doing. And it wasn't my first time using Ouija board, because somebody had brought one over to the house that I grew up in, and me and the neighbor kids were playing. I think it was like a New Year's Eve deal. My parents would have a New Year's Eve party, and so me and all the neighbors that had their kids that I played with in the neighborhood, we were doing this. And actually, the Ouija board told me that I was going to marry Jake. That's what it
Really?
said, my husband. Yeah, it did. And it said I already knew him. And I did already know Jake, because what people might not know is that we've known each other since we were 10. We just haven't been married that long. We've been together 9 years. But yeah, it told me that I was going to marry Jake. And at the time, one of the neighbor kids, his name was Jake. So everybody thought, tee hee hee, that's, the neighbor kid Jake, not the other Jake that I went to school with. But yeah, it told me I was going to marry Jake, which I find funny, because I am definitely married to Jake.
Did you know your Jake at the time that the
Yeah, I
Ouija
knew
board
him.
said this? Yeah.
I did, but like at the time, because there was a Jake among us, a different Jake, everybody assumed that that's what that was.
Right.
But I knew Jake because we went to school together. I knew my Jake because we went to school together. I've known him from the fourth grade on. So but it told me it was somebody that I already knew, and that his name was Jake. And of course, everybody thought, oh, that's the Jake that lives across the street, because he was there, not even thinking in my head, like, oh, it totally is right, but it means a different
Right.
Jake.
You're like, other Jake, other Jake.
Other Jake, right. So that sort of ended. And my mom always just got very uncomfortable about the Ouija board thing. So she ended up destroying it and doing things to make sure that none of that energy would come back to the house. Even though, and that house was a new construction. So it's not like we had this old house also. But my brother and I, we were talking about in that house how like different weird stuff would happen. My brother plays guitar, my dad played guitar, and so we have these acoustic guitars sitting, in various rooms of the house, in his room, and then downstairs. And oftentimes I would hear just the something strum the strings of the guitar, like boom, like out of nowhere. Like, okay, that just happened. Just gonna move on. Or he also said this happened to him. I know it happened to me. We had this dresser, and my dad made the dresser, and it had these handles on them that kind of hung down, and sometimes you would hear them like flick up, and then because they were very lightweight, and then it would like hit the metal plate that it was connected to, and just tap tap tap. You would hear that happen sometimes, where something would flick up those dresser handles. And he said it never really happened to him until after I moved out and he stayed in my room. But I do remember it happening quite often there. And then the other thing, and he always said he always heard the dog run up the stairs, and I would hear something like that occur too. For me also, though, I would be laying in bed, whatever it was would jump on the bed. I'd always feel something in the bed with me. And I always thought it was a dog, because sometimes I would wake up and the bed would be shaking. A dog would be like a dog would scratch, and you know how it like kind of shakes the bed.
Right.
So that would happen too.
Well, that's pretty freaky. I think that would bother me slightly.
And it's weird because I didn't really feel like it was like a bad presence or whatever. So it didn't that stuff didn't freak me out. Now, I told you that my parents got divorced. They got divorced after being married to each other for 20 years. So they were divorced. And then during the divorce time, my mom bought a new house. And I say during the divorce time because they're now remarried to each other again. They should have never divorced, but hey, such is life, I guess. When my mom bought that house that she lived in, that house was not a great place at all. Like parts of it were good, but it ultimately just was not a great feel to it. And at the time, I was 18 or maybe 19 and I was going to community college, but was living with my dad. And then my dad was a lot stricter on me than what my mom would have been. So then I moved in with my mom. Which is exactly why I moved in with her, because I knew that she would be less strict on me than my dad was. But I think my dad was just trying to like have control over a situation where he felt at that time the situation was a little bit out of control.
Right.
So I moved in with her. I think the first week that she moved in, there was a file cabinet left in the basement. And in the file cabinet was some teeth.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Really?
right. Yeah. And
Like in a
they were
bag or
gold,
just loose in
like
the bottom?
in an envelope. There were some gold teeth, and I think she ended up mailing them to the previous owner. Like, hey,
Oh, that's a great find, especially when it's anytime it's in the basement. You're like, really with this?
yeah. So I think I'm getting ahead of myself because I have a list of all the things. I tried to write things down. This is not going to go in chronological order, but we'll talk about this house. So the house itself, it had, let me think. It had two bedrooms on the upstairs floor, and it had a pretty decent sized kitchen and a big living room area, and then like a Florida room off of that living room area. But it's downstairs, like in the basement. It was like a finished basement. It had a little bar, and then there was like another bedroom down there, and then there was another bathroom down there, and then there was a laundry room. And it was a walkout basement. So then it opened it up to like the backyard. And the backyard was a pretty decent sized backyard. That backyard was a cool place. I liked the backyard. And one time when I was out there just in the backyard, that's where I saw the little fairies. And they were just these little teeny tiny, like iridescent seeds. Or that's what it looked like. Like there was like this little seed like iridescent, or maybe it was even a glow, I don't know, around them. And I think that's one of the sketches that I sent you where you could just kind of see like the little shape of this little body inside of it. And there were these little white guys, and there was a whole bunch of them, and they were just like spiraling up into the trees, like in this really beautiful, like double spiral type deal, not moving like how bugs would move, you know? And I just kind of sat there and admired them. And then around that time, then all these flowers started just popping. I mean, not like instantaneously, but in that backyard, like all these tulips and then all this like the lilacs and the roses and there's all these flowers just everywhere in this backyard. I've since read that that's like one of the signs of these fairies is that when they are around, they have like all these flowers and different nature things happening. So to me, it was just like a confirmation after seeing them and then seeing all these flowers kind of just sprout up. Like the whole yard almost was like a garden of flowers.
Well, just to be clear, you're not some little kid with your imagination going crazy. You're like
Right.
18 or 19 at the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I am. But then there was other stuff that would happen inside the house. So oftentimes, if I was by myself in the house, the dishes would clink all the time, just moving around. And I remember like being there and saying, "Okay, let's stop it now, please." And it would stop for a time. I can remember being in that basement, and my mom had like a big sectional couch and a TV down there, but it was like this would have been like early 2000s, so it'd have been like the older TVs, like the tube TVs with the glass front, and the TV was off, and I don't even know what I was doing down there, but sitting on the couch, maybe I was looking at something or reading something, but I remember looking up at the TV screen and seeing the reflection of somebody standing behind me. And I left the house that night. I think I went to my dad's and stayed.
No, when you got to your dad's, did you tell him why you left your mom's house?
No, they were already asleep. So I just went to bed. Oh, it's here.
So you never really brought that up to
Um,
anybody?
well, I think at the time I brought it up to the person I was dating, like, and then I did tell my mom. And it wasn't like my mom never didn't believe me. Because my mom's always been kind of like that, you know? And it's weird because the person, whoever it was behind me, was kind of dressed like how you would see like a man in black, like with the white and a black tie and like a black jacket. And they were standing behind me in that reflection.
Yeah, that would have got me out of the
So
house too. That's for sure. I'd be like,
yeah.
yeah, no thanks. And you're there by
So
yourself.
yeah. So it wasn't, and like at the time, because I mentioned my mom was a police officer. Actually, both my parents were police officers. I think she was working like nights too. So there would be some nights where it would just be me at the house. Worst though at the house, and it's to this day the scariest thing that I've ever been through in my life. And when I say this, like some people can kind of just be like, well, it was a dream. You just had like a night terror or whatever. But this has never happened to me before. I've had some pretty intense dreams, but I don't, it usually just like what I remember, I just remember it starting wherever in the middle. I don't remember the dreams from beginning to end. I remember this dream from beginning to end. And I've actually talked to Shanna a little bit about this since I met her at Monster Fest. And then we've kind of like talked to each other a little bit because I kind of felt connected with her a little bit about her story and what she saw, or maybe because we're both teachers. I don't know, but meeting her and then, listening to her story,
Yeah.
I remember how I was just felt that kinship. So we've kind of talked about it. In this dream, I'm like standing. The best way I can describe it is like in a checkout line, because it would be like me and a counter and then like a bunch of other counters next to me, like in a checkout line, but there was no cash register or anything like that. It was just like a line of me and other females. I look over and I make eye contact with the female that's standing next to me, like in the next row over. And I kind of am like, what are we doing? Like, what's happening? And she looked up at me and she was like, shh, like it put her hand, shushing like to her mouth, like, and she was terrified. She was like, you can't be talking. You can't bringing attention over here. And as soon as like she shushed me, I hear someone say, "Oh, Reverend." And they said it like mid climax, like, "Oh, Reverend." Like, and in my head, I'm thinking, well, that's weird because that's not something you'd hear. Like, that's not how you usually talk about your Reverend
Right.
or whatever else. And then I look basically like in front of me now, because at first I was standing to the side just looking at all these rows of women. And then I see like a bed, but it doesn't have like a lot of like blankets or anything on it. Maybe just like a white sheet of some sort. And there is a female hanging off the bed, and her skin is real white, and her eyes are real purple, and her hair is really white. You ever see the movie The Cell
Yes.
with Jennifer Lopez about the dude of the dreams and how he would bleach out those women at the end?
Mm-hmm.
Like he would put them in bleach and they would all have this white hair and this white skin, and that's what it looked like. And she even had a collar on, this female. On top of her was a thing. Its face looked like an alien because it had the big black eyes like an alien would have, right? But it had this mouth full of all these needle razor sharp teeth. But they were like needles, and there was like just rows and rows and rows of them. And its torso was internal organs and almost like falling out of them, but not. And then it got up and it started to walk toward me. And I've never been more frightened of anything in my entire life, like coming toward me. And all I could think to do was to put my head down and not look at it or make eye contact with it. But as I looked down, I could see its feet, and its feet were hooved. But it kind of walked real slow. Uh, like it wasn't like because of the organs being seen and stuff, like it almost was like it wasn't like put together well, but it walked real unnatural. Even though it's not like it was like all these internal organs were like falling out of it or anything like that. It was just everything about it was unnatural. And so I'm watching the feet. I'm watching the feet and I'm thinking to myself, like, if it could just get past me, I'll be all right. So it's walking past me now. And I start to feel relieved that it's passing over me. But the minute I felt that relief, it turns around and grabs me by my throat and kisses me. And that's where I see all the teeth and the ugh. And at that moment, like after receiving that kiss, that's when I woke up, and I kid you not, I expected it to be right next to me. When I opened my eyes, I knew I was in my bed, but I expected it to be there. I was afraid to open my closet because I was afraid it would be behind the closet. I took a shower downstairs in the basement in that second bathroom down there. That's where I would get ready. When I come down the steps that was open to the living room area there, I expected it to be standing there. When I go into the shower and I pulled the shower curtain, I expected it to be like that's how long that this stuck with me. I expected it to be behind the shower. Like I was terrified through the morning at what this was. And after doing a little bit of research and not knowing anything about it, I think that this was like what would be considered an incubus, just from the general rapey mood to the whole thing, just from what I've read about how it made you feel. And it's weird because I was actually trying to figure out, I think, what Shanna saw. But then I started to think, I wonder what I saw. And so when I was doing the research, it was like almost like immediately. And I think in the sketch that I sent you of kind of what it was, like in the background, there was like a female on this bed. And then when you look up, like if you look up anything about incubus demon, the same kind of painting of a woman hanging off of a bed is in like several different depictions of it.
Yes.
It's so weird to me because that's like what I saw. Yeah, it's never left me, and I've not had anything like that happen since. I think that I do a thing like where I try to like because that's probably the one of the most scariest things that's ever happened to me, and I try to protect myself because I don't want to encounter anything like that.
Well,
But at the
and
same time,
sorry, real quick,
no,
because
go ahead.
your drawings are very detailed and wonderful. By the way, if you guys go look up 286, those are Leah's drawings. So you're very good at this, by the way. And what you sent me. And do you mind if I put these in show notes for people to see your
Whatever.
depictions of all this? I mean, the face is very expressive, right? I mean, it's got this horrible grimace as much as it can. The face is furrowed, and then you drew even its hands, with like these long fingernails, and to have it seem to you, I mean, to you it seemed real. Didn't matter because once you woke up, you're still looking for the damn thing behind every door, and like you said, every closet, everything. You're waiting for this to actually be there.
Absolutely. Like,
Do you feel that somehow that was some kind of a representation of? Because you even said in Facebook Messenger, quote unquote, it was the bad house. Was there certain areas of the house that to you, maybe it was your room? Was that the worst part of the house for you, since you are a little sensitive, and or was there, or was it just a kind of an all over kind of a feeling? Even though, well, I kind of answered my own question. You said the backyard was fine. I mean, you saw fairies in the backyard. It was light and airy, and you had no problems there. So was maybe your room kind of the epicenter of that?
I would say either that room or the basement. The basement wasn't a great feeling either for the most part. But yeah, that room probably because then I remember like after that, I remember like if my mom went there, I would hang out in her room and watch TV.
Mm.
And I didn't stay at that house very long after that. So there's that. And like at the time, so then here's where we kind of go out of order a little bit. So my mom, even though she is very Christian, she marries in this other aspect. And her, or she would take me to these classes for like, I don't know, like spiritual development or psychic development, whatever else. And it would be at this bookstore that had like all these like, new agey type books that they sold, and they sold crystals and one of those types of deals. But then they'd have a lower level where they would hold these classes. And I do miss that part. Like I miss going to those classes. I miss having that guidance in all of it because I don't have that anymore. And maybe that's maybe my goal because I know Jake's goal when he talked to you about the Littlefoot that we saw, he wanted to he wanted more information about if anyone else we saw him. And since then he's had a lot of different people come out with different stories specifically in our area, so that's been kind of cool. And then I guess for me, I want to be able to reach more potential, but at the same time, like I do not want to be stalked in the night by demons. So it's one of those things where, you know, maybe I'm coming on the show as sort of like a thing like, hey, I have this, but I don't know what to do with it. And I would love to be able to use it for the powers of good, maybe in my job, or because I am a special educator, so I work with kids that don't always have the ability to express themselves. So that's sort of maybe what I'm doing. But when I did those classes with my mom, we had other things that would happen. One specific thing that stands out to me is there was another woman in the class, and I remember, because we'd always like meditate and things like that. And I remember having the distinct feeling that she lost her daughter, and she did. And then I remember that it was a car accident, and I just knew it. I just knew that her daughter died in a car accident. And I knew that there was a blue car involved, and I knew there was a red car involved. That is what happened to her daughter. I guess there were people drag racing and at night, and her daughter was driving home, and then one of the drag racers just head-on collision. I knew that, like, there was just things that I just knew. And I remember telling her, like, I know you wear something every day that's hers, whether it be a piece of jewelry or one of her shirts or something, just because you want to be closer to her. And all of this was exactly right. And so, and little things like that have happened to me throughout my life, but it was better back then, when I had more guidance in all of it. I always knew my aunt was gonna, well, I didn't know she was gonna die, but from the time that I was very little, so weird that I could see her, but I could see her bald in my head, and I couldn't understand why. And I could see her bald with glasses on, and she wore contacts most of the time. And she died of cancer. The very end of her life, she was bald, and she would just wear her glasses all the time. And it wasn't until like later, like I was like, oh, that's what that was about. But I didn't know because I was like 10. So it just, little things like that have always occurred. And Jake always said that I'm really good at, reading people or knowing people. He always says that I'm better about, especially being empathetic with people. But we had a friend, Marshall. His name was Marshall, and he died, and I knew he was gonna die. That I did know, and I said something to Jake about it. I was like, I know he's gonna die. He was in a motorcycle accident, and that he survived. Uh, but because of that, he had a traumatic brain injury. But I had dreamt that he was still gonna die, and unfortunately, I think he just very much wanted to get back to whatever life he was living before the accident. So he couldn't just, take a break from being a single guy, going to bars or whatever else. He would drink, and then I guess he had a seizure and died.
And is that how you saw it happening?
Um, I don't think I specifically saw how it was going to happen. I think I did feel like a seizure, but I don't think that I knew specifically how. I just knew that this was coming.
Yeah.
It's just little stuff like that has happened to me throughout life. And sometimes I'll tell Jake about it, sometimes I won't. We went to the school in Middletown, Ohio. It was supposed to be like a haunted school, whatever. And it was because the cryptids of the corn guy were having like a thing out there. So we went out there to support them, and then we did this tour of this old dusty school in Middletown, Ohio, and I intentionally did not look up anything about the school. Um, it was something that Jake was like, hey, do you want to go? And I was like, yeah, let's go. And he was like, I don't know if we can take the kids. We'll have to find a sitter, which is always like a whole other ordeal. I'm like, okay. So, ahead of time. But I didn't look up anything about it. I just, whatever Jake told me about it is what I knew. I knew it was a school. I knew it was in Middletown, and I knew it was supposedly haunted. So we walked through this school because they just let you kind of free reign walk through it. And some people that came to it, they had like the ghost hunting equipment, but I didn't do anything like that. But I remember, like, Jake asked me, he was like, so do you have any kind of feelings about anything here? And I had told him that I felt like that there was a big accident, like with a big explosion. I don't know what that was about. And I had told him that I felt like there was something to do with a janitor there, like a custodian. And I said, I feel like I can't breathe. And so after and then after the ghost hunt, they had like a little live podcast and some other presentations, but they basically gave you some history on the school. And I guess that there was a train wreck that occurred right there by the school, and the school was used as like a triage for all the
Wow.
passengers. And then they didn't mention there, but later afterwards, I looked up stuff about the school, and I guess there was a fire there where a janitor had passed away.
Jeez, Leah.
Those are the two things that I just, like just weird things like that come to me, but I don't, again, I don't know how to like channel it or guide it. And sometimes I think that Jake is like a citronella to whatever it is, which sounds weird because we've seen this like little thing, this
Right.
weird little foot. But I, like when it comes to stuff like that, I feel like everybody has these gifts, and then Jake's gifts would be the shield. Like he's like a shield because there's never any like thing when I go to bed at night. There's never any feeling that somebody is in the room or any kind of. There's never any sitting on my bed anymore. It's nothing like that. And it hasn't always been that way. Like I have felt somebody sit on my bed quite all throughout my life and had different feelings about who that might be or what that might be or whatever feeling that it gave off, to me. But not being with Jake. Jake is burns brighter than I think what anything wants to be around, which is good because I don't want to be stalked by any more incubus demons in the night.
Now, Leah, the purpose, though, of your mom putting you in those classes all those years ago is that because she knew or had a sense that you were in fact sensitive and that you possibly needed guidance to navigate that?
Yeah, she has a story. I guess I was about 9 or 10 years old, and my grandfather passed away. My dad's dad. He There is a cemetery in Tennessee that is very hard to get to. It's on a mountain, and it's called the Rockwell Cemetery, which is my maiden name, Rockwell. But that's where my grandfather wanted to be laid to rest, so we journeyed up this mountain to this very specific cemetery or whatever, and it's a funeral, it's a sad day. We're burying my grandfather, my dad's burying his dad, and I guess while we were up there, my mom was just kind of like sad and my dad was kind of sad, and here I am, like this little 9, 10-year-old girl, and I think I just went up to her, and my mom said that I looked at her, and I looked at her very matter of fact, and I said, you don't have to cry because he's here. He's happy that everyone's here for him, but he's okay. And then I went skipping along into the cemetery like nothing, like this was just a normal thing to say to somebody. But she's always told that story like, oh, Leah always said She came to me so matter of fact and was like, "You don't have to be sad. It's going to be all right." Because he's all right and he's happy everyone's here.
But
So maybe that's what she saw.
but you do feel like once Jake came into your life and you start dating and then eventually you move in together and you're doing all that stuff, that he in fact did activity did tamp down for you.
Well, yeah, for sure. I told him that 100 times, like, and he said that it's not the first time he's ever heard that before. He said that someone once told him, "Whatever you are, you are too, you burn too hot. You are too bright." It's like, but I be like a moth, the moth lights or whatever, and he's like one where they get zapped by,
Right.
because he's like the electrical one.
I mean,
So
yeah,
there's
that is a good thing because you have had some negative things going down. Those fairies in the backyard, did you see them just the one time, or was this an ongoing thing when you go in the backyard?
Saw him just that one time, and then, but again, like, then bad stuff started happening in the house, so I didn't hang out there very much.
Yeah.
Even though they were there, that was nice and all. It just, I don't think, for me, I didn't feel like it was worth the negativity,
You're like, Dad's house is actually not so bad.
Right.
That whole dream, though, with the incubus, the other thing that stands out is, and you kind of mentioned this about coming on the show, and I've brought this up to people too. It'll be a question, right? Like, and I know you've heard me ask it, like, do you think that even just talking about this stuff is going to kick it up again? And it goes right along with the dream, though, right? Because first of all, it's striking the fact that you're there with nothing but a bunch of other women. Very creepy considering what was obviously seemingly going on there. Nothing good. And the whole Reverend thing, that's a whole nother bag of grossy worms that we could dissect for 2 hours. But the fact that you started to say something to one of them and then she's doing don't call attention to yourself. And that's essentially why I ask people, are you worried about this? Because you're telling all of these sometimes they're horrible stories, things that give people PTSD, like legit. And are you worried that essentially you're calling attention to yourself now again because you're speaking this stuff out loud and essentially reliving some of these things, right?
Yeah. So part of me maybe is a little bit afraid of that, but another part of me is pretty confident in how protective I have been since then. But not only that, like, who who my husband is, like, in just his mere presence sometimes.
Yeah.
You've met him. He's just very, like, loud and big and bright, and he's just this force to be reckoned with. So part of me is not, because of that. What I'm hoping though is that, the good, I can get the good out.
Right.
Or if there is, because I think is, I think that those kinds of bad things are attracted to bad energy. So with my cousin, she lost her mom. She had this, like, just think about the energy, the grief that goes into, like, losing your mother, especially at that age, and what she might have attracted then. Like, of course, like, we probably couldn't seance because, duh, with one, we are not in the right frame of mind, and two, like, that would just be like super, candy, like candy to the strangers of the underworld. I don't know, like,
Yeah. Essentially. Yeah. And you guys were there with open arms looking for that information and it's just like smacking its chops.
right. And I mean, for the most part, I'm a pretty positive person. I try to be, I try to be very grateful for the things that I have. I know that I don't have all the good stuff or whatever, like, all the people, but I think I'm pretty rich because I have the family that I have the husband that I have. So I don't, And that's not to sound cocky, like I'm not going to attract something bad, because that's, I think, wherever you are, whoever you are, you could potentially attract something bad. But I tend to think that people who are in these just terrible stages of their life, they probably attract more bad.
No, I definitely
I
agree
feel
with
like they're,
that. And if you already feel like you have that shield in Jake, I think even just mentally being in that space makes a difference, because you're kind of going, come at me, bro. Like, you can't, because you already have, there's a proven timeline there. That's why I find it fascinating that even at the beginning of when you were just dating and doing all that, you're like, I remember things tamping down. That was the catalyst.
mm-hmm. Yeah, because so my daughter's father, my daughter is Jake's stepdaughter, even though she considers him her dad. But her biological father is just not a happy person, and he is an alcoholic. And so, as a result of that, he has not been in my daughter's life a while now. But when he was around, it was very, it was a very, he attracts very negative things. So that, like, I do remember being woke up in the night because something sat down on my bed. And I remember even screaming because I was afraid of what was sitting on my bed at the time. So it's not like it's gone away. It's just not like there's nothing malevolent that's come up because of where I am now. And I think it took me a lot of strength to sort of get away from that situation too. So just in doing that and in being confident in myself, because I wanted something better for, at first I always thought I had to protect my daughter, right? That's what I have to protect her. So in order to protect her, I have to be here and I have to shield her because I can't leave her alone with her, biological dad. But then I realized, like, this is not a great example. She does not need to grow up thinking that this is how it is supposed to be with people. And so she was very young. She was 3 when I left him. So she's been around Jake for 10 years. So even in those times, like, I feel like that's when that stuff kind of is attracted, if that makes sense. I don't know, maybe I'm rambling.
No, 100%. I mean, I think it has a lot, if not everything, to do with who you surround yourself with. We've all heard that time and time again. They'll be with they'll get with a boyfriend or girlfriend that is just, I mean, beyond sad. It could be full on depression or something like that. And then activity just goes just through the roof. And if that person happens to be sensitive when all that starts, forget it. Then it's a situation like you're describing where something sat down on the bed or something standing behind you. When you turn the TV off, there's a shadow behind you, or you see things flitting in the corner of your peripheral vision, but it's not something good. It wasn't the cat, because I could see the cat over there. And that stuff just seems to be so attracted to negativity. So that does say a lot then for Mr. Jake Dressel then, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the what I have with my husband is something that they make movies about. And I, like, trust me, I appreciate the relationship that we have. And we may not have, like, we could have, like, you always think in the back, coulda, shoulda, woulda, whatever. Like, we could have gotten together way back when, because we've always known each other. We were best friends in high school. We went to the movies together and stuff. But, we were teenagers and very insecure. So I always thought, he always thought of me like a sister, not like that way. And he thought the same thing. And then, it was just this whole stupid
Uh,
teenage. insecurity stuff
T-
that kept us not together.
no, timing always seems to work out the way it should. Because you
Exactly.
could have gotten
And
together back then and been together 6 months, and it wasn't the right time, and you'd never speak again. So I think things
right.
work out the way that they should. And might I say, and before I let you go, I definitely wanted to talk about that figure outside the school that people were seeing, if you'd be okay with that. But before we go there,
Oh yeah.
I want to say, because you brought up the fact that Jake is, and we talked a little bit about this when I was in Ohio for Monster Fest, but Jake has put so much work into just trying to find more people that have seen this Littlefoot situation. Again, go back to 286, guys, and listen. It's really a fantastic episode and super interesting sightings from Leah and Jake. But if anybody out there has any more info, or a friend told you something weird at work, whatever it is, please get in touch with me. Or, of course, you have Jake and Leah's first and last name. They're very easy to find. It's Dressel, Dressel, on Facebook is probably the easiest place to find most people, but you can always get in touch with me. But yeah, any dribbles of information out there, Huber Heights, Ohio, in and around that area. It doesn't have to be Huber Heights, of course. We know these things can travel very easily. Get in touch, because Jake's doing some good work with trying to compile some more encounter stories out of that area, because of the fact that these aren't your run-of-the-mill grassman sightings. So I just wanted to throw that out there for everybody. So yeah, Leah, so let's talk about because this was a recent thing that went down just outside of your school, right? Can you just start at the beginning, whoever brought something up first, whatever the situation was there, but this is kind of cool.
So I mentioned that I'm a teacher. So I teach high school. There is period in the day that we have built in to the schedules. We call it advisory, and it's basically a 20-minute block where the students have specific classes that they go to. It's usually based on their grade and their last name. So it'd be like the freshmen from A to B, in this class, and it would continue on, so on and so forth. The classroom that I am normally in, and I say normally because I travel, but this year I was in one classroom for 4 periods out of the day, which is kind of unheard of because I'm used to going from this classroom one period to the next. Like, I travel like a student, have a little backpack and everything. But I was in this one specific classroom from second period, then it would be the advisory period, then third period I'd still be there. So I kind of would just stay in that classroom. And then I had certain students on my caseload that would come in and work with me, and I'd work on goals for their IEPs and things like that because I'm a special ed teacher. The classroom right next to me was a freshman class for advisory. Those two classrooms, the one that I was in and the one that the teacher's next to me in, are smaller classrooms. So she had like a limited amount of space. And so sometimes a group of like 4 or 5 would ask to come and sit in the room I was in. I will say my room, but I also shared it with other teachers. And I was totally cool with that. Like, yeah, that's fine. They can sit in here. So I think it was a group of 4 of them. And they were just kind of hanging out and talking on this day. Normally, they'd do things like they'd have like different, maybe like a mental health lesson, or maybe like a responsibility type lesson, or sometimes they would have a study hall where they work on work. Sometimes that's what they would do, all their voting for like student council, things like that. That's always what happened during the advisory period. And I think this specific day was like the study hall period, and they didn't have anything to do, so they just come and hang out with me. Totally fine with it. So I'm just kind of sitting at my desk and I was working on something, but I can hear them talking, and I hear them. It was one boy and then 3 girls. Another person walked in and he said something like, I don't know, it was like a Slenderman or something. And he was like, you think I'm crazy, but man, I'm not great. Like, this is what I saw is crazy. So of course now I'm perked up. Like, not meaning to eavesdrop on these kids' convo, but I'm totally going to eavesdrop on this conversation. So I hear them talking about something like a Slenderman that they encountered when they were walking to the gas station, they said. And so I'm like, time out. I'm sorry. I'm totally eavesdropping, but it's okay. Like, trust me, it's okay. So I kind of explained to him, like, well, I really like these paranormal type stories. I really like it. I'm really into it. I don't really tell people that a lot, especially students, but it sounds like you guys got something going on here that I'd be interested in hearing about. So they kind of start telling me this story. They were like, well, the one boy, he said that he and his friend were walking to the gas station to get something to eat. And I was like, okay. And so I'm asking them about what area in town. And this is, by the way, the same city that the Air Force Museum or Air Force Base is, Patterson. Same city. That's the district I teach at, in Fairborn. I'm like, okay. And I was like, so is this like at nighttime or what, guy? And so he's like, yeah, it's at night. And I was like, okay. And I was like, okay, so you, I was like, let's just call it what it is. You guys were out running the streets of Fairborn at night when you probably shouldn't have been, right? And they were like, yeah. I was like, okay, that's cool. That's cool. I'm not telling on you or anything. I just want to hear your story. So here they're out late at night and they essentially decided they're going to go to the gas station because that's what's open to get something to eat, a snack or something. He said he and his buddy were walking together. They see this very tall man, and the tall man is wearing a cloak. I say cloak because it's hooded and it go they I asked like he said the black cloak went down to like his feet. They said he was wearing a mask, like a a surgical mask like we've been wearing, but his head was really misshapen, like one part of it was caved in. They said that they did not like the looks of him and how obnoxiously tall he was. And they said he was as tall as the stop sign. So when I tell Jake this story, he goes out with a measuring tape to the stop signs to measure how tall this is. And he said the stop signs are roughly 9 feet tall. They said that they were walking to the gas station and it was kind of following pretty close behind them. And they did not like it. So they kind of ran to the gas station to get something to eat. Well, then they're coming back home and they don't see it, not at first. Then, as they're walking home, they see it. They said they start walking and it's walking. And then they start walking a little faster and it's a little faster. And they said, like, then what they would do is they would walk, and then when they would turn around, it would be way closer than what they expected it to be. And it just seemed to be walking, not running. So then they decide they're going to run. And they ran, and they said when they started running, it was downhill. And they ran downhill, and when they turned to look back, it was running too. And then the weird thing of it all is when it was running like its arms were up in the air like Cornholio, like, like from Beavis and Butthead, like, I am Cornholio. Like his hands were up like that.
Oh.
Like, what a weird way. First of all, that's a really weird way to run. And they said that they made it home without further, like, they lost him and then they made it home. That was the first time. That was the first time. But these kids like to hang out at night, do hood rat stuff, I guess. And so on another night, they decided they were going to go to the park, and there's a pond there. So they wanted to hang out by the pond. And they were all hanging out there, and they said they saw like a light that was strobing in the distance in the woods. like an orb-like light. And they didn't like the looks of that. So they decided to peace out, get out of here. And when they did, they saw the tall man again. This time, the first time they said the mask was white, but the second time it's black. And everything about him was black. But same, like, caved in part of his head, obnoxiously tall, and was following them. And they live in an apartment complex, I guess. So they did the thing where they lose them again. But so when they get to their apartment complex, the boys peel off from the girls. And then the girls said then they see it behind a trash can in their apartment complex area. They run to their house or their apartment or whatever. And then the girl said when she got home, people were asleep because I guess they're allowed to be out at night. She said she went to her bedroom and she saw it standing in the window.
Mm-hmm.
And she said she pushed herself against the wall and knelt down so it wouldn't see her. And then she decided she was going to go wake up an adult and tell them that there was someone creeping around the window. They said they had one of the adults come out with a baseball bat and they saw the shadow of it between two cars in the driveway. And then it took off like super fast when the adult came out with the baseball bat. And they have said that they have seen it here and there from time to time, but it'll be something like they'll come out and then it'll be standing way off in the distance somewhere else. And then they'll just go back inside because they're not going to be out there with but they say they've seen it quite a few times. The tall man is what they call it. And this could be a group of freshmen that are just pulling my chain, but it was a weird thing because the way that the conversation started, it wasn't with me, it was with another person, another student that walked in that was like, "You're crazy." And he was like, "No, man, like what I saw is what I saw." But they had told me that they felt like it followed more the girls than it did the boys. And another thing they told me was that a family had moved out of the apartment complex because they had a baby and they thought somebody was coming in and looking at the baby in the window.
Ugh.
It's ready to go on some sort of like drive around in the middle of the night to look for evidence of this. But yeah, like I thought there were a lot of interesting details that they gave me,
Yeah.
And they said his arms were abnormally long as well. He had really long arms.
I mean, someone's just itching to get shot, whether it's a person or whatever the hell that thing is. He's asking for it. I got to tell you, to be creeping around windows and especially following girls home and stuff like that. But the caved in head was creepy enough, but then your description of it running with its hands up, I'm like, I'm out. I would run so fast. I mean, forget it. It'd be my fastest time ever.
So not something that I've seen personally, but it is something that was told to me in a really fascinating manner. And then, the fact that like there's other aspects of it, like the orb that was strobing that they saw, like they didn't like that. So they were like, well, we're getting out of here. It's just a lot of different things going on there.
Well, and
the long arms.
And the fact that it's not like you said, they didn't know that you were even into this stuff. So it's not like they were just trying to bait you into this strange story. You really just it was happenstance that you heard this.
Right. Like they're not in my class. They just were hanging out in my room at the time. Yeah. And like as a result of that, I know those kids now and I'm like, and I'll say hi to them and stuff. But I've never had them in class. those students, we all kind of, whenever a teacher needs help out here and, I need to spread out these kids, sure, they can come hang out here. That's fine. But it was just a weird story,
Well,
to hear from some kids at school.
well, you know what it reminds me of is JP's, for lack of a better term, we called it the black-eyed kid. But it was the kid in the red hoodie. I'm sure Jake filled you in with all that inside joke stuff that we were going to wear red hoodies to Monster Fest because he's terrified of, red hoodies, especially kids in red hoodies. But it reminded me of that because of the way that it moved. Not the arms over the head or anything, but JP describes, seeing this kid leaned up against a tree and hearing the crying as if the kid was right next to him. But I think the kid was, oh God, here I go trying to remember something that I should not say if I don't, but I think it was like 70 to 100 yards or whatever the first time, right? And then he
Right.
decides it's not good. So he starts kind of booking it back down the trail with the dog back to the house. And then he hears it again and turns around, and it had gained far more ground than should have been
Right.
humanly possible. So that really reminds me of that encounter JP had.
Yeah. And actually, Jake sent JP a picture of our son in a red hoodie.
Yes, he
just
did.
to,
Yes, he did.
brighten his day.
Yep, that is especially for you, bud, because that's just like me with the spiders. You can't say stuff out loud if you don't want people to torture you with it,
Right. Right. So yeah, that is the story of the tall man and that the students told me at school a few months ago. So I don't know what that is, but Jake is ready to take a tour of Fairborn at
Heck yeah.
2 a.m. to see if he can pick up anything.
Heck yeah, man. Any lights in the woods, you're like, oh, maybe the tall man is close. And, hey, we're not saying it's connected, but it is at least of interest that Wright-Patterson Air Force Base happens to be right there, right?
That is true. But again, like Jake always says, if I wanted to be any kind of famous for saying any things that I said, we would have. We said we saw a black triangle in the sky, and because we live by Wright Pat, everybody would believe us
Right.
because you're by Wright Pat. But no, we see an Ewok.
Yeah, you see, yeah. You see a yub.
Right.
Awesome story, by the way. I much prefer that over the black triangle anyway. So there you go. I think it's much cooler because that's most all that stuff's ours anyway. We got this damn UFO story out here falling apart left and right. I'm like, well, come on. We knew that was coming. Stop it.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably more things that I'm missing or forgetting to tell you about that I've encountered throughout my life, but that is a pretty good summarization of it all. Hope I didn't ramble on too much or get off track because
No, not at all. Not at all. And I appreciate you sending along those drawings. I'm going to include those in the show notes. Everybody can go to intothefrayradio.com. That's where all the show notes are, of course, for each episode. Well, Leah, thank you so much for coming back on with me.
no problem. I really enjoyed meeting you at Monster Fest. I thought it was a great time, like you said earlier, and anything I can do to help you out, I absolutely will. Because I know that, you opening up that door for Jake, especially with all the different research, you have access to things like people will tell you, they might not tell us, but they'll tell you. So yeah, anything that I said spoke to anyone out there, that would be awesome to hear about, or even the little guys, Littlefoots, that seem to like to follow the rivers, we believe,
Yeah.
But he's compiled a lot of more information as a result of that, and a lot of other encounters in this area. So I think that's really cool. So anything that I can do to help you, I absolutely will.
Thank you so much, Leah. I appreciate that. And the same goes for you guys. And as I said earlier, and Leah has already kind of mentioned, hey, if you want to reach out to us, reach out to us. If not, then they can reach out to me and I'll pass it along to you guys, whether it has to do with Littlefoot or something else. Because you know what's so cool is that, especially when someone can draw, which I cannot, but if someone puts their encounter actually physically onto paper, sometimes that sparks something in somebody's head. And yours is so specific, that damn night visitor, incubus, succubus dude, with the guts being seen and all that. I'm kind of wondering that, as I say, go fishing and we'll see what we drag in, because that was just such a specific part of that quote unquote dream. I mean, it is a dream, but is it is it a representation of what's in the house? We don't know. I mean,
Right.
that's a whole can of worms there. But yeah, anyway, long way of saying thank you so much for drawing that, because I think that maybe that will help drag some more stories in about that.
Oh, and when I was doing the research, that's what I put in. I put like a demon with internal organs on the outside. And then incubus came up.
Mm.
And then that's how I was able to connect those. But then when I was looking at the different types of like incubus, coincidentally, one of the versions of it from one of the different areas, I can't tell you which one specifically because I don't remember, but I remember sending it to Jake, was a small, hairy troll man.
Huh. No kidding.
Right. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's weird.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to think of them like that, but I mean, that's kind of
No.
cool that you came across that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I think what we saw was completely different.
Right. Yeah,
But it was a coincidence in the whole research of it all.
I mean, or maybe not. We could be completely wrong, but
Good. Good.
I mean, we all just want it to be a little Bigfoot, the different type of Bigfoot that just stays little and cute, and he says yep all day. But
Okay.
yeah, at least it didn't. I mean, if he
Eating
had the
apples.
headdress and a little spear, yeah, he's like, yeah, he just likes apples and he likes to hang out, and
Right.
he gets a little too close to folks and lets people see them, and they don't know any better, I guess. But well, yeah, Leah, thank you so much, and I know that we'll be in touch because we got ongoing things that we have to discuss, especially once hopefully more people reach out about your stories, and of course Littlefoot in Ohio.
Yeah.